Bonn Park is supported by Eco Cafe. For over a decade, Eco Cafe has been providing Waterloo Region with certified organic, fair trade, direct trade, and Rainforest Alliance coffee beans. Sold and freshly roasted at their headquarters in the village of St. Jacobs, Eco Cafe is proud to offer a truly different approach to your average cup of joe. Eco Cafe's team members combine their passions for coffee, the environment, and the human relationships that entwine them. You can have coffee delivered to your door from St. Jacobs to anywhere in Canada. The team will hand-pick a monthly serving of coffees from around the world for you to explore. Eco Cafe offers full-service, warm and safe takeout, curbside pickup for coffee beans and retail items, as well as gift cards that make perfect stocking stuffers. So seize your day and make a conscious choice with the aromas and flavors of Eco Cafe. Visit ecocafestjacobs.com or follow them on Instagram and Facebook. Bonn Park is supported by TLC Pet Food. For over 25 years, TLC has been providing the highest quality pet products to fellow pet lovers. With headquarters in local New Hamburg, TLC has grown from a family-owned business to serving pet owners across Canada and the US. TLC Whole Life Pet Food is made using high-quality ingredients and is delivered fresh and delivered free to your doorstep. Find their premium quality cat food, puppy food, dog food, and biscuits online at tlcpetfood.com. We think that you'll find the name TLC suits them perfectly. We are supported by Deja Vu Salon and Spa. Never intimidating, always engaging. That's the philosophy at Deja Vu, where making customers feel comfortable is the name of the game. Whether you're a regular or first-timer, Deja Vu is a sanctuary that will make you feel at home. When you enter the salon, essential oils and scented candles ease you into the relaxation to come. Then you are guided into a private treatment room with soothing music to fully escape the stresses of the outside world. You'll be in talented hands with Deja Vu's trained estheticians, electrologists, and stylists. The spa offers a range of high-quality products to help you continue the pampering at home. Life is stressful, especially now, and sometimes it can seem like there's not enough time to take care of yourself. So why not let Deja Vu take care of you? Deja Vu Salon and Spa is located at 671 Guelph Street in Kitchener. Book your escape today by calling 519-745-2888 or visit them at dejavusalonandspa.ca. We have a hunch that you'll keep going back, so you may get a sense of deja vu.
Welcome to Bonn Park.
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 Welcome to Bonn Park. I'm Sara Geidlinger.
And I'm Marshall Ward.
And today we have Maddy Taylor.
Yeah, Maddy is a sexual health educator at the SHORE Center.
SHORE stands for Sexual Health Options Resources Education. And this is what people would have called in the old days Planned Parenthood. But they do so much more than that.
This is a really fascinating interview. I love talking to Maddy, and I just learned so much about, I guess, the complexity of her work and the many, many layers to what the SHORE Center does for people.
Yeah, SHORE was founded in 1972 under the name Planned Parenthood. And the founders included a librarian, a social worker, a doctor, and a nurse. That is a beautiful combination of people to try and understand what the public and what youth need in terms of sexual education.
Yeah, I can see why she's so good at her job in our interview. She's very straightforward with us in this interview. And also, this is our first remote interview where we don't have our guest with us here in the studio. So
here she is, Maddy Taylor. Maddy Taylor, thank you so much for joining us on Bonn Park.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
We're very excited to have you here, and we're very appreciative of all the rescheduling during COVID and all of that we had to do. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. I sympathize. I also had to do a ton of rescheduling with workshops, so I get the struggle.
That must be hard too, because a lot of what you do, so you work for SHORE, Sexual Health Options, Resources, and Education.
Yeah.
So a lot of that must be like human connection. Mm-hmm. And trust building.
Yeah, totally.
Conversation starting, all that kind of stuff. And that, as we're all learning, it's super hard over computers.
Yeah, totally. I think for like our clinic team, which they deal with more pregnancy options counseling, I think it's kind of a pro and con, because I think for some people that like one-on-one connection is really important. But then it's also nice sometimes, I think, to be able to have that conversation over the phone, because it is kind of like stressful and scary for some people. And some people really want to remain anonymous. And it's almost better for them to not have to go into an office and see a ton of people. I mean, they will eventually have to in order to like get the resources they need. But I think like there's a lot of pros for our clinic team. For me, it's a little bit harder to do sex ed workshops over the computer, just because, yeah, you definitely want to like establish that trust, and build up like a fun, calm presence, which is kind of awkward on the computer sometimes, especially with young kids. So it's a struggle, but we're trying to make it work.
Trying to read more, maybe facial cues than body language and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And hoping people have good Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Right? So Shore used to be Planned Parenthood. That was the name of it.
Correct. Yeah.
What does Shore do for people that don't know?
Yeah. So Planned Parenthood, like as a concept, doesn't exist in Canada anymore. So the overarching like Planned Parenthood structure is now called Action Canada. So they're like deal with it for the entire country. So some clinics did remain like Planned Parenthood, whatever region they're from, but we made the choice to switch away from Planned Parenthood. So yeah, Shore Center, it stands for Sexual Health, Options, Resources, and Education, like you said. So a big part of what we do is in our pregnancy options services. So we help people out with like the 3 legal options you have in Canada when you find out that you're pregnant, which is abortion, adoption, and parenting. So we prescribe the abortion pill and give people the abortion pill every single day. We connect people if they need surgical abortions. We also help people out with birth control consultations. We insert IUDs in our office. So it's kind of all those overarching in preventing pregnancy. And then we do have our empowering pregnancy program, which helps people out who had an unplanned pregnancy and then choose to parent, so keep the baby. So that's kind of our clinic services. And then we do have our whole education team, newcomer education program, which is run by a woman named Hoda. She speaks both Arabic and Farsi, so she does programs for people who are newcomers to Canada, who are more comfortable learning about sexual health in their native language. And then most of what I do is in-school workshops. So I talk to folks usually from like grade 4 to grade 12 about sexual health and puberty and all that fun stuff. So yeah, there's kind of 2 aspects. There's like the clinic side, which deals with pregnancy options. Then there's the education side, which is most of what I do.
Amazing.
I realized that I was very familiar with the term Planned Parenthood prior to becoming Shore, but I had no idea where I even heard of Planned Parenthood. It was just a
I remember bus ads on the, on the trans GRT.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got a thing associated with it, right? People know it, so it can be complicated sometimes explaining what Shore Center is to people.
Yeah, that's interesting. You go into schools as early as grade 4. I think about how, so my own daughters are teenagers now, and I'm really impressed with the sexual education they receive at school. But I think about how back in when I was a kid in the 70s, I don't think that started until maybe grade 7 or 8. Do you know where those things started to shift and when we started to move down into the grades where it is now?
Well, so I think people get a little confused because they think sexual health, they think like condoms and birth control. So grade 4 to grade like 6, grade 6, you start to talk about some of that stuff, but it's just talking about puberty. So it's talking about like body changes and getting your period and all that stuff. So it always was in the curriculum to varying degrees. I think it kind of depended on what teacher you had and their comfort level, but it's definitely been more of a thing recently that people start to teach it and are super like, it's super in the curriculum, like this is something that needs to be taught. And then around grade 7 and 8 is where in the curriculum we start talking about like condoms and birth control and more of those things people initially associate with sexual health. So Yeah, it's been like a long ongoing thing. And I hear a lot of varying degrees of how much information people got even still. So
Am I correct in thinking part of the new sexual health education for youngsters, grade 4-ish, is consent? And, you don't, if I don't want to be hugged, don't hug me. And if I don't want to be touched, don't touch me, like those types of things?
yeah, that's a huge part of it. It's hard for us because we deal with a certain like scope of sexual health. So we usually have an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, depending
Not
on
very
like how many.
long.
Yeah. So it is definitely something we talk about. Obviously, consent goes hand in hand with sexual health, but there are agencies like SAS, like the Sexual Assault Support Center, where their whole like sort of scope is consent. So yeah, we tend to more focus on like how your body's changing, how do we deal with the private parts of our body, and how do we talk about them to keep us safe if somebody like were to touch us somewhere we didn't want to be touched, that kind of stuff. But we don't deep dive into consent just because we have such a short amount of time, but it definitely is something that's like integrated in everything we talk about for
That's
sure.
fantastic. Yeah. Where are we at in terms of teaching sex ed to kids under a Ford government? Things have changed so much.
A lot of people know that the Ford went back to the 1995 curriculum, and that only lasted a short amount of time, and there was a lot of outrage about it, and then it shifted back. Sorry, my neighbor has decided to start sawing something right beside me. Hopefully that's not picking up. But yeah, so and then it went back to the 2015 curriculum, which is where we're at now, which most people pretty much agree is pretty okay. It includes most of what I would think is important to learn. So I think it's difficult because like different teachers have different comfort levels with what they want to talk about. So for us, like we are very consistent. We hit all the things. We come into every class and we have a script that we go through. But we can't vary off of the curriculum, right? So like in the curriculum for grade 4, there's a little bit about like identity, and maybe starting to like touch on some issues to deal with like trans folks and what that all looks like. But it's not super ingrained in the curriculum, and we can't come into schools and teach about things that isn't in the curriculum.
Right.
If I decide that, I think this is a class that really needs this information, if it's not in the curriculum, I can't teach about it. What we can do though is answer any question that's asked of us. So if somebody asks a specific question like, hey, I have a friend who used to be a he, him, and now they use they, them pronouns, and like, how do I navigate that? That's something that we are allowed to talk about. So I think a lot of those like really new conversations that I end up having are the ones that are initiated by the youth in our programs. Like they have such intelligent questions, which tells me that like, even if it's not necessarily coming from the curriculum, they are out in the world learning these things. So it's a weird mixture of like, I think people are learning things online or in media, wherever it is, or just through like friends. And I hope that programs like ours are just like reaffirming a healthy and positive, like sex positive way to talk about it.
That's an interesting term, sex positive way. What a wonderful term to have. Like when you're talking about these intelligent questions from the kids, I want to know, do you find our youngsters, like the little ones, are they more open to ask their questions than say the grade 8s? Or does it depend on like the sort of culture you're walking into, depending on how the comfort level of that team of kids together?
Yeah, that you totally hit it on the head there. It's like every school you walk into, you kind of get different vibes. I think sometimes it's like the comfort level of the class. Sometimes classes just have weird personalities like that don't mix together that well. But yeah, I would say the questions you get are very different, and definitely grade 7s and 8s tend to be that period where sometimes they look like they're in pain for most of the time that I'm there. So it can be harder. A lot of the time, the way like grade 4 to grade 6, I would say like they're always relatively happy to see me. Sometimes they're like, ooh, but I like to think by the end of it, they're like into it and they have questions. Grade 7, 8, sometimes I like really have to push. I find with that age group, it's like if you can connect to like media that they're into, like if you can find out, okay, so like what's a fun TikTok that you guys watched the other day, or like talking about those like cheesy Netflix movies, like To All the Boys I've Loved Before.
Oh, that's a
like,
good movie.
Like, so
that's not cheesy. That's a wonderful movie.
I love that movie too. No, I love them. Like I watch them because I like them, and because they're so I can be like, so what did you think about like those relationships? Were they healthy to you? So yeah, it tends to be that age group where I really have to dig into like what they're interested in, or to like sidestep into what I want to talk about. You kind of have to trick them into it. Where grade 4s to grade 6 are kind of like, oh my God, let's talk about periods. Like, how do you use a tampon? Like all that stuff. And then high school they tend to already have a certain like comfort level. It's like in their lives no matter what. So it's hard to avoid at that age group. So most of the time, like, high school tends to be pretty good. They tend to ask the questions they want to ask. And we always do like an anonymous question box, which I'm sure you guys got at some point even.
Oh,
it's
no.
like,
I went to Catholic school. Sex didn't exist.
yeah, we pretend like we don't, it doesn't. Yeah, I also went to Catholic school, so I never got
I went to Catholic school a long time ago, so.
Okay, you're right. That's true.
One of our guests on the Bonn Park podcast is Jeff Chard, who's the head of the history department at Sir John and Macdonald High School. And he talks about how we're in really good hands with this generation of kids, and how is that how you feel when it comes to high school students, that we're in good hands with this generation going forward when it comes to acceptance and kindness?
Yeah, I think so. I think the ones I have yet to have a really bad experience. Sometimes, they say things that don't like are shocking at the get-go. You're like, oh shoot, like they say things like, I don't understand why somebody can't just like be the gender they're born as. Like, why do you have to be like, are you trying to get attention? That's something that I hear a lot, right? Like, they want attention. Like, I have this person and it seems like they're transitioning because they want people to look at them, or, you know what I mean? So I think those comments at first, sometimes they're really shocking. And I definitely had volunteers that get like angry. But I think if you can like get past that and be like, okay, so actually instead of this being shocking, it's a conversation starter, right? Like, even if they are trying to throw a loop or like throw me off in some way, it's better than them sitting there and being silent. And we can be like, okay, why do you feel that way? Like, I'm assuming maybe you're a cisgender person, meaning you were born a gender and you assumed like you were assigned a gender at birth and you continued to want to be that gender. So like, what sort of level of privilege do you have in that, right? Like, you always got affirmed in the gender you were. So imagine what it would feel like if somebody was like, no, I actually want you to, like, if you can kind of get those comments and turn them into things that start a conversation, whether or not it's going to change their opinion or it's just going to be useful for other people in the class. I would say like I've had very few circumstances where we can't turn something into a conversation.
I definitely, I'll be totally upfront and honest here. Gender identity and pronouns was something because of my age, I think, and because of, like you said, my privilege of being a cisgender woman is, that was something for me to get used to, something for me to really try and understand and wonder, why is it important? And what really threw me into it was, and really made me understand was, okay, so if somebody is deciding to express their gender openly, I guess is the right way to say it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That poor little soul living this whole life under an assumed gender that they didn't want to live. That's what really got me, where I thought, I'm a mother. Imagine if my poor kid had to hide that. So of course we should celebrate that from the very beginning and be open about it.
Yeah.
Do you know the comedy series Friends?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're watching that right now with our teenagers and as a family.
Okay.
And I realized a lot of what I think I grew up thinking came from the TV shows I watched.
For sure.
And,
overly sexualized.
Yeah, and I think Friends is an amazing show, but there's this running joke throughout the whole series about how Ross's ex-wife was a lesbian,
mm-hmm.
right? And some people think that Chandler is gay, and this comes up over and over and over again.
But it's viewed as a joke.
It's viewed as a joke.
Yeah.
Unlike The Office, where Michael Scott is pretty clueless about things he's saying. He's really the only one in The Office who's got these antiquated ideas. But I mean, it's. I think about how our TV shows that we watched growing up shaped us, and it's a good thing we've been able to kind of beat that stuff out of ourselves.
And I would actually say, like, Marshall, on that point, part of me being a little bit more understanding about specifically gender identity and pronouns is media and things that I watched and saw, which stuff that's very normal for my teenage daughters to watch now, where I'd be like, oh yeah, this does need to be, it shouldn't be shocking to see these things. Everyone needs representation, right? And for a young kid to have representation on Netflix or on TikTok or wherever, that's a big deal, because our representation was, now we're going to get into old school stuff here, stuff like Friends, Cheers, Love Boat. It was sex laden. Women are for sex. They might glaze over the topic that women have a little bit of power in that, but it was just sex, and anything. And not in a healthy way, right? And anything even remotely touching on homosexuality was a joke, right? So that's where even just our generation is coming from. And what a flip and a beautiful change to see, like I said, representation in media.
And I think about in Friends, I think it's Carol is his wife's name, or his ex-wife's name. I think the only thing you really know about her is that she's now with a woman.
Yep.
Like, that's her only personality trait. It's the butt of every joke, right? And same with Chandler. And I think Chandler even has
a trans
one
dad.
of his parents. Yeah, one of his parents is transitioning. It's not super clear because it's always the butt of a joke, right? That's the only thing you know. So yeah, I think media has really shifted into stuff like that, which were maybe like people a bit older than me. And then like I didn't have a ton of it growing up, but I think now, like I think of shows like Sex Education. I don't know if you all saw on Netflix, but it's obviously not perfect, but like it has so many things in it that I think if I had seen at like teen age would have been like groundbreaking, right? As opposed to shows like Friends, who maybe went along with the times, but you look back at them and you're like, oh my gosh, even Monica in that bodysuit, like
the fat suit, yes.
The fat suit, it's so awful. And like the poor fat girls who are watching that being like, the only, like, Monica is now okay because she's not fat anymore, right? Like, everything got better in her life when she wasn't fat. Whereas, like, so what? Like, whatever people's bodies look like, that doesn't affect their happiness, right?
Dude, that was such a butt of so many jokes on that show. And not only did she become not fat, she became the tiniest woman that you could imagine. She is just such a slight, tiny wisp of a woman, even now in her late 50s, I think, or 50s, maybe it's early 50s. And that, yeah, like you said, everything came together for her. Like, at least you're not fat anymore. But I don't think kids are getting that anymore. Like,
there's Euphoria. Euphoria was a show that I think had a trans character in it, but their identity wasn't that they were trans. Like, they didn't even really.
I saw that.
They didn't really even outright say it, like, ever in the show. Like, they had a storyline and lived their life and happened to be trans. You know what I mean? They were on the show only to show cisgender people what it's like to be trans, you know, like they have a life, they have a storyline, and they happen to be trans. I thought that was like a great representation in media. I mean, that show also has a lot of like really people using really harmful drugs and other things that maybe aren't the best.
So I watched that show too. Me and my daughter both watched it separately. That would have been a little awkward to watch with your mother, I suppose. But the same thing, that character, I can't remember her name right now, but I sort of... Jules, yeah. I exclaimed to my daughter, I was like, did you know Jules is trans? And she's like, yeah. And that was, what a beautiful response, right? She's like, yeah. So... You know, but another thing from that series in particular, Marshall, I know you haven't seen it, but there's a very interesting angle about teenagers overusing and overwatching pornography and sort of being molded by that and thinking that that's reality. And there was a couple of constructive conversations in that show where it was like, no, that's 100% what I don't want. Don't do that to me. During sexual situations. And then there's some other parts where it was just, again, that feeling of, this is just happening to me. Let's just wait till this is kind of over. Which of course, they also touch on like abuse and assault and all of those horrible things that happen. It was quite a basket of things, Euphoria, for sure. But
yeah, it's an emotional show.
Is that something that comes up in your education at all? Like pornography? Because kids just have it. It's just there. You know?
Yeah. So porn is now in grade 6. That's new in the newest curriculum that came out. It's part of the grade 6 curriculum. So the way I explain it is like, I bring up the movie The Fast and the Furious. I don't know if we're familiar, a lot of car chases, like people are driving the way you never would in real life. And I'm saying, like, what if your driving instructor, when you turn 16, showed you The Fast and the Furious as a way to teach you to drive, right? That would be ridiculous. I would like stay off the roads. That's not how you should be driving. And like porn can be compared to that. It's made by actors and people for entertainment purposes. It's not made to teach you how to have sex in a safe, healthy way. It's purely for entertainment.
What a beautiful example, because that's something that most people can understand since there's 16 Fast and Furious movies.
Yeah.
There's way more porn, but hopefully at grade 6 they haven't seen all of the porn that's out there.
I was going to say, look at the Shore website. I think about how incredibly efficient the information is on there. I was reading about the abortion pill, which I didn't know anything about. And you're really able to cover the important information within just maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs. And anyways, it looks like it's really, really been well crafted to make it easy to navigate. I think we've all seen some of the sexual health films from the 1970s.
No, I went to Catholic school, like I said.
Okay, and they're pretty scary and pretty creepy. Anyways, I think Shore's done an amazing job at giving you really important information in a very easy to understand way that isn't scary.
Oh, wow. That's a huge compliment. Thank you. I won't take all the credit for that. That was a lot of educators that came before me. But yeah, we work really hard to try to make it a useful resource for folks. So,
and I have to assume, like, if somebody's looking up the abortion pill, there's a very good chance they've never looked it up before. So to have that information well laid out in a non-scary, factual, open way is fantastic.
And information is power too, I think, for a lot of people, right?
Information is power. You're 100% correct. I was on the Women's Crisis Waterloo Region website because we shared a podcast guest, Melissa Durrell. We talked to her, and I was looking up her episode, and I wanted to listen to it. And that website, for mobile use and for on your desktop, has an escape button, a safe exit button. Have you seen that? No. So there's a button in the bottom left corner that if you hit it, it shows you local weather in case you... I thought that was such a beautiful tool. Like if somebody's really nervous or maybe in a precarious situation or abuse or just embarrassed about what maybe they're looking up and unsure, what a beautiful tool that is for a young person especially.
We have a similar thing on our web app called Choice Connect, which is like similar. It just connects you with abortion providers. So it has, I don't think it shows you the weather, but I think it just X's out the screen. Like it just puts it away. Yeah, I think it's the norm, especially for services that have stigmas associated with them. Most of them seem to have something like that because, yeah, we know how harmful it can be if somebody walks into the room while you're trying to get an abortion referral, especially for young people and people with maybe partners who are not on the same page.
Like you said, education is power. Like what role do you think education plays in keeping especially young people safe?
It plays a lot of roles. I think, like, we know that sex is going to happen, and it's going to happen between people that are not just people that are cisgender, right? Like it's people have penises and people have vaginas and uterus, and we need to teach how you prevent against things that can happen no matter what type of sex you're having, right? So we know that like trans people are at a higher risk for things like STIs and unplanned pregnancy because they don't get sex education that's specific to them, right? So yeah, I think it plays a huge role, and we try really hard to provide education that's inclusive to everybody who's listening. So we try not to make it heteronormative. We try to always refer to like people with a penis or people with a vagina, a vulva, and uterus, right? And like you need these things to make pregnancy happen. You need these things for STIs to possibly happen. And here are different tools, no matter what sex looks like to you, to prevent those things from happening. And also like acknowledging experiences like people who are maybe asexual and won't ever want to have sex, which is totally fine. But we explain like, even if you're someone who doesn't want to have sex, it's so important that you know these things, right? Because it's important information. It can be powerful to you to support a friend, to be able to talk to a partner about the things you do or do not want. So I think in so many different realities, sex education is so important, and specific sex education that touches on like their specific experience is so important. So I think as the world maybe becomes more open and people start speaking about their individual experiences, especially experiences that were not in the light, like when you all were younger, when I was younger, is going to change sex ed like more and more. You're going to see it like continue to change and adapt to be inclusive to everyone's experience, because we know that like sex is more than what it is in porn or just like penis, vagina, sex that everyone like pictures when you say sex, right? Like there's so many different experiences. So I think as we encourage people to be more open and come out about their experiences, we can have more and more inclusive sex ed, and like constantly thinking as a sex educator, like, okay, what part of this, like if I'm explaining how to put a condom on, what part of this is leaving someone out or like a certain identity out, and like how can I change it to be better? So yeah, I think that is all way to prevent harm against those folks, and like giving people names, giving people resources is one step in preventing harm against them. Obviously, like I can't walk in there and be like, okay, here's how to prevent all violence, all bad things from happening, because there's so many different agencies and different factors that go into that. But if I can help them maybe not get pregnant in an unplanned way, or get an STI, or talk about like what is sexual assault and what can it look like, and here's agencies that you can be connected to if that is happening. What does like power imbalance look like? If I can be one step in that step to being safe and having the tools to keep themselves safe, then I think that's something that's really important.
Maddy, does Shore have to engage at times with anti-abortion groups? The one I think that is most prominent is when I'll drive down Old King Street going south, I guess, towards Cambridge, and you'll see people standing outside with their signs and looking very somber. And the signs will have these messages on them, or sometimes graphic images. And is there times where you hear from them and that there's some kind of conversation that happens?
Yeah, definitely. There definitely is. We try to work like with rather than against. So like it's what you're speaking of is probably 40 days for life. So usually it's, I think the Catholic Church and a bunch of other churches, like they have 40 days where they will protest abortion clinics every single day for 40 days. So like during that 40 days, instead of engaging with them, because it's kind of unneeded and not helpful, we try to like really amp up our services and make sure we're really making people feel supported during that time. Yeah, there's a few, like, I don't know if you're familiar with crisis pregnancy centers. They're pregnancy centers that kind of pose themselves as being abortion clinics, but they're usually like rooted in religion or stopping people from getting abortions pretty much. But they make themselves look like somewhere that's pro-choice. So trying to kind of like build up against that is really important to us, because I can't even imagine like the awfulness of thinking you're going in somewhere to get an abortion and then being shamed or kind of coerced into making a decision that you don't want for yourself. So like, yeah, there's a lot of different things that we have to do to kind of work against them. Yeah, for me personally, like I don't have a ton of engagement with them just because I don't work at that end of our services as much. I do sometimes like come into education that are run by those programs that I have to then like reteach, sort of thing, in a way that I think is sex positive and inclusive to all identities. But yeah, definitely our clinic has to work against that quite a bit. And yeah, so it's not super in my scope, but we all kind of in our individual programs try to work against those things.
I didn't realize that those places existed. I have seen online videos where, you know, it looks as though volunteers are helping a young woman into an abortion clinic, and then it turns out they're actually protesters. Have you seen those shocking videos? Anyway, it's like, you know, how there can be volunteers to escort someone through a crowd of protesters, but they're actually protesters. But I didn't realize that those centers existed. That's actually kind of disturbing.
Yeah, it is. This is not as important, but I've seen like ads in the newspaper that talk about come and learn about the beginning of the universe and how it all began. And I'm looking for the physicist, astrophysicist name, and it's something else.
Well, a lot of those places will like purposely not say that they're anti-choice on their website. Like they'll kind of beat around the bush. Whereas opposed, you come to our website, it's very clear we are pro-choice, right? But they won't outwardly say it. It's all a trick. It's like a scheme. It's really kind of scummy.
That's a good word. I would say scummy for sure. One thing I forgot to ask you is, like, how did you get into this line of work? You know, there's all types of work. What drove you here into this important field?
That's a good question. I also went to Catholic school. I grew up in a very religious family where like we didn't really talk about these things. It wasn't like bad in any way, but yeah, it was never something I talked about. And I went to university and I majored in psychology. And I just started reading these books and going to these like lectures by profs and stuff that were so empowering. Like I learned about feminism for the first time and like intersectional feminism and just felt like this breath of fresh air. And I was always super interested in the nonprofit sector and working with kids. When I was in my undergrad, I actually like ran an organization that did workshops for young girls or non-binary folks. So it wasn't focused on sex ed, but in so many of those programs, like we'd have a program that would be focused on like body positivity. And in that conversation about body positivity, like we would just start talking about sex ed because so many people gain weight when they go through their period and start to experience like body dysmorphia and that kind of stuff. Or like a young person with a uterus would come in and start telling me like, oh my God, like I don't have anyone in my life that I trust. You know, you are this kind of outside person who I've gained trust with over like the weeks of this workshop. Like, let's talk about it. So it was kind of in that I realized like there's such a gap in this information. And a lot of the time it does just end up being whatever random person you feel trust in. Because for so many folks, like maybe they are the offspring of people who are newcomers who struggle in a culture, coming from a culture where these things aren't talked about openly, like how to talk to their kids about it. So yeah, it was just a huge gap I saw. And I had been watching Shore Center for a while. I really liked the work they did, and a sexual health education position became available. And I applied so fast. Like, I think I literally saw it and like started typing up my cover letter right away. So yeah, it was kind of like that's the transition. I just saw a gap and like knew that this is something I wanted to work in, whatever way it was. And I just also love kids. I mean, I do sexual education to adults sometimes, but yeah, I find like there's something so special about talking to young people about it and like the look of relief on their face when you say something to them where they're like, you're actually not dying because you're bleeding, or like, you know, like getting erection out of nowhere is actually super normal and it's your body practicing for your future. Like there's all these things where you just like see their face and they're like, oh my God, like everything's going to be okay. So like, yeah, I started this job and like that was a high I chased and I just love it so much. It sucks because it's online now, so sometimes it's hard to connect with people in that way.
It's very important work because that's what makes us that whole relatable factor is what makes us feel comfortable. Like you said, oh, I'm not dying. This is totally normal. I'm allowed to feel this way. And not only allowed, it's my body's way of just growing up.
It's so fun. Like it's really sad sometimes. Sometimes I feel awful that kids had to not have these conversations and feel like they were dying. But yeah, it's so cool to listen to their experiences and hear like even how different parents and caregivers teach sex ed in such cool, unique ways that I never even would have thought about. And I'm like, oh my God, like, can you ask them if I can use that in my workshops? Because that's so fun, you know? So yeah, it is really fun listening to people's experiences for sure.
Maddy, I had a cousin who at 16 hid her pregnancy from her parents with baggy clothing just to avoid what was inevitable, which was they would have basically every day said to her, how could you have done this to us, right? Do you see that where there are young people coming to you that late in the game, like just right at the end, still not knowing what to do and having kept it a secret?
Being in a place that is pro-choice and that like we honor all choices, whether that choice is to keep a pregnancy, even if you are super young, or the choice to end a pregnancy. And I think like we're talking about mistakes and how you have to own up to your mistakes. Like I used to come at it from a super like, if you're 16, you get pregnant, like why wouldn't you get an abortion? Like that's such an obvious choice. Like you're 16, but that's not everyone's reality. Some people just are so scared and some people just want a parent. And so I think like, yeah, I've learned so much through meeting folks who are younger, who are having babies. Like we do workshops often at Monica Place. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but they're like a home for people, I think it's like 25 and under, who are pregnant and it was unplanned and maybe got like kicked out of whatever living situation they were in, and just like chatting with them and how like the different factors and experiences that made up their decision to keep their pregnancy, and like how wonderful they are as parents. And yeah, and I know for a lot of them, like it was like that. They hit it to the last second and then got kicked out when the people they lived with found out. And yeah, they were lucky in that they got a place to live and be set up. And we support a lot of them in our Empowering Pregnancy program once they age out, to like find an apartment and find cribs and everything they need. And yeah, so I've never had someone disclose that to me, but I've definitely like chatted with people who've had a similar experience, and like even changed my own perspective in that like there's so many ways that a situation and like can look, and being pro-choice is more than just supporting abortion. It's supporting someone's right to be a parent or not be a parent in whatever way is best for them.
Maddy, I imagine in your work there's never a day where you don't realize that what you're doing is important. Like, that's important work you're doing. I always envy these careers where you don't sit around questioning if what you're doing is is important or not.
I appreciate that. I do think it's important. It's harder some days than others, I'll admit it, but yeah, it's a very rewarding job.
Do you always know the outcome when it comes to people coming in for help? I think about police work, or certainly I hear about from doctors and nurses how somebody comes into your life for a day and you're trying to help, and then they leave, and you don't always know the outcome of what happened. Do you find that you often do know what happens after they leave?
I would say it's actually the opposite. I think for most of the time, where people have like given some really scary disclosures about a situation they were in that was maybe abusive, and yeah, you kind of don't get follow up. There's a very specific procedure that you have to follow, and they don't always follow up with you and let you know that what you did worked. And I think it's very similar for our clinic services. I think a lot of the time, once people come and see us, especially if their choice was to end the pregnancy, they don't ever want to talk to us again, which is very fair. I think I would probably be the same way. I mean, we have definitely had people come back and say like, thank you so much. But yeah, I think for the most part, it tends to be that kind of same thing you were talking about, where you don't always have a follow-up, and you kind of just have to trust that you did the right thing and continue to learn from every situation.
Yeah, I would imagine that's the truth usually.
There's a part on your website that talks about how what you're doing is not just education, but I think there's a part that it's about motivating people to, sorry, I don't remember the wording exactly. It has to do with not just giving information, but motivating them to be able to follow
like seeking
through.
Information.
Yeah.
I think, because like, it's just the reality of what we do, that we come in for an hour and then we leave, right? And like, there's so many situations where I can see the kids like wanting to ask more questions. They're like, there's a million things I'm going to think of tomorrow that I wish I had asked. So I think part of what we do beyond just giving information is, for some folks, being the first person they talk to that talks about sex or puberty or whatever it is in a super positive, open way. And once they hear that, hopefully empowering them to like feel okay seeking the information, right? Because it could be that the way I explain how to use a tampon is totally useless to them. They need to go home and research it for themselves, or feel comfortable asking someone in their life that they trust, right? So yeah, that's a big part of what we do, is like empowering people to include sex positivity in their life and not think about it in such a shaming way, because no matter what you do, it's going to be part of your life. Your body is going to change if you're a child and you're maturing, and you are going to run into conversations about sex, whatever your reality of that looks like. So yeah, empowering people to be okay to get information. Like I said, information is power. Really important part of what we do, I think.
As we start to wrap up, I want to ask you about some of the misconceptions people might have about what SHORE is, or what kind of work you do.
Yeah, I think what I was kind of touching on before is that we kind of talk people in to abortions. I think like that word pro-choice often gets like too associated with abortion, and like only that, as much as like I am pro-abortion if it's something you choose that is right for you. I think like pro-choice can be like so much more than that. Like even what you said about tampons. For some people, using tampons is not the right decision, even though it is like commonly what a lot of people use as a way of dealing with menstruation. Like some people I've met are just like, I just don't want to put something in my body, which is totally fair. I think a lot of people come at sex ed as in like, you have to use tampons because it's the right thing to do. You have to use condoms. There's no way to have sex that's safe without condoms. Or you have to be on hormonal birth control if you're having sex. Like, all of these things, as much as the information is great to have, to know they are a resource for you, they are not right for everyone. And like, I can't teach sex ed in a way that makes it look like those are the only options. And if you're not doing this, you're doing something wrong. Like, I'm not there to tell you you have to use condoms. I think it's a choice that you make. If you want to have sex and condoms are not right for you, like, okay, let's have a conversation about how you can prevent pregnancy without condoms. Or, you know, I know for a lot of people, like, taking hormonal birth control is really pushed on them by caregivers and medical professionals. But like, hormonal birth control has so many harmful side effects for a lot of people. Like, I know I have pretty bad anxiety, and like, hormonal birth control made my anxiety go through the roof. So I had to look at like other options. So I think that's the biggest assumption that I find, is that, you know, like, we're very stuck in one way of doing things, and we're not open to conversation and like harm reduction, and having conversations with people about what the best method of that is for them, no matter like what that looks like.
I love that. I think that's so important. I have one last question too about me using the proper terminology for LGBTQ+.
So this is a question I get all the time. And I personally like to use LGBTQIA2S+. But that being said, that's not consistent. Like, you're not going to talk, another sexual health educator is not necessarily going to use that same combination. I think as long as you're doing it with good intentions and are open to criticism if you get something wrong, whatever you choose to do is okay. Yeah, I think something that's really important is including the two-spirit in there. Yeah, so it's an Indigenous identity. I'm not Indigenous, so I can't super get into it, but it's an Indigenous identity that's existed for like hundreds of years, like before colonization happened, where people kind of had both genders inside them. So it can look a ton of different ways for different people, but yeah, it's an Indigenous identity. I think it's just super important, especially in Canada, where we have such a history of colonization, to include Indigenous people in there, especially because like they were the first people here. So a lot of people will like even put it at the beginning of the acronym.
Okay, let me list some of these, and maybe Marsha, you could even stop if you want some explanation, because we're learning. You know, I'm not afraid to admit when I don't know something. So we're very familiar.
And I'm still learning.
Good.
And I'm a sexual health educator, so.
And things, you know, and it will still change through the course of your life. So much more will change as people are more comfortable figuring out what this means for them. Totally. So we're very familiar with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transsexual, and now two-spirit is in my list. Queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, which is very real, as you said. And then ally is in there. And then for the plus, I have pansexual, agender, genderqueer, bigender, gender variant, and pangender.
I've always found it interesting the use of the word queer. Like the word queer was used in certain ways in the 60s and 70s. It was very
derogatory when we were young.
Yeah, certainly in the 70s and 80s. And then I never can quite tell why and when that word's being used, or if it's being used appropriately.
Yeah, so it's kind of one of those things where the LGBTQ plus community took it back so it's a word that I would only use if you are part of that group. So a lot of the time I think where the confusion comes is because they like people who are part of that community will often say like, I'm a queer person, right? So people are like, oh, okay, that's a word they're using. So I would only use it if you identify that way.
I think people think queer is synonymous with gay and lesbian. I think that's
old thinking, though. That was what she's saying, is that that could mean different things for different people, queer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think, yeah, it is. And I think for some people, especially like people who are new to this whole world, right? Like they realize they're part of it. And sometimes it takes a while for people to like fully figure out where they're at, right? Especially if it's been suppressed their whole life, like you said. So I think, yeah. So like, it's often used as I'm part of this community, but I'm not ready to label myself yet. Because often too, I think like when you label yourself, a lot of uncomfortable questions from family and friends, etc., can come. So yeah, I think it's just a way of keeping things like I'm figuring it out. Some people, they do have it figured out and they just use it because it's easier than explaining these identities to people who maybe aren't sure what they mean.
And it's also, if I'm correct in saying this, it's not somebody from that community's job to educate everyone else. It's our job to try and be a good ally to figure out the information for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to ask questions if you have them, but just be respectful if the person is not willing to answer them. They're like, I'm not feeling it tonight, sorry. Yeah.
I've just recently been trying to be more proactive about asking about pronouns if I don't already see them. I recently put them in my Instagram bio, my she, her pronouns, as an invite to, it's okay to tell me what yours are or if I've messed up.
Yeah, I'll start out by saying that I am cisgender, so I don't have this experience. So, but from what I know, from what I've talked to with those people, it's not a fixed thing. And I think people often get bogged down in like, okay, but you were she, her yesterday and now you're they, them, and it's confusing. And I think that that's something that's really important for people to learn is like gender is fluid and it can change and it can look different throughout people's lives. So yeah, I think people do play around a lot. I know a great educator who works at Aqua named Erin. When I've watched them give presentations about this, they often say like a good way to figure out names that look good for you is like to go to Starbucks and practice using a name and see how you feel when they call it out. And if that's something that like, yeah, I thought that was so smart. See if it's like something that works for you. And if you feel like icky when they call that name, maybe you like try something else next time. So yeah, I think for people, it's complicated and it's not fixed. And it's something that as an ally, you have to be open to those conversations and realizing that like life isn't simple and people change and grow in tons of different ways.
Hey all, thanks for meeting us in Bonn Park. Please like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on the platform that you're listening to. And follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Bonn Park Podcast. Original music by Alan Lung.